It started with a whisper from the sky. At first it sounded like a normal radio signal, soft, distant, nothing unusual. The kind of sound astronomers had heard 1,000 times before when listening to the endless noise of space. Yet one late evening, deep inside an old observatory sitting on a mountain far from the city lights, a young technician noticed something strange. The sound wasn't random. It had rhythm. It was repeating, like a heartbeat that came from beyond the stars. He played it again and again, trying to find an error in the system, but the pattern stayed the same. He called the other scientists. Within hours, the small control room was full of people listening to the same sound, their faces pale with quiet fear. The signal wasn't human, and it wasn't natural. It was too clean, too precise. When the pattern was decoded, the message was short, just a sequence of numbers that looked meaningless at first. But when compared to astronomical data, those numbers pointed toward Earth's location. It wasn't a hello, it was a mark. At first, no one wanted to believe it. Governments brushed it off, calling it a technical glitch. News channels received pieces of the story but were told to keep quiet. The world kept moving. People went to work. Children went to school. And only a handful of scientists carried the heavy truth in their hearts. Weeks passed, and more signals followed. Each message was sharper, clearer, almost impatient. They came from the same region of space, a place so far away it should have taken thousands of years for any message to travel. Yet the signals arrived instantly, as if whoever sent them didn't follow the same laws of physics that humans did. That's when the secret meetings began. Leaders from every nation gathered behind closed doors, leaving the rest of humanity in the dark. They didn't argue about if something was coming. They argued about when. Some wanted to prepare for peace. Others whispered about building weapons strong enough to destroy entire skies. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. Earth had never been united long enough to face something like this. The months that followed were filled with silent panic. Strange constructions began to appear in deserts and deep oceans. The world's brightest minds vanished from their jobs and universities, recruited into something no one could talk about. Even the night sky looked different. Satellites moved in new paths, forming a kind of shield no one was allowed to explain. Ordinary people sensed the tension. Radios caught strange echoes. Streetlights flickered for no reason, and pilots reported hearing faint voices in their headsets while flying at night. The world seemed haunted by something unseen. Yet life carried on because people always cling to normal days when fear grows too big to face. Inside one underground facility, hidden below the frozen fields of the north, scientists worked day and night. Their mission was to create something called the Last Command Project. It was meant to be a final message, something that could travel farther than any spacecraft, faster than any signal ever made. It would carry the story of Earth, its people, its dreams, its pain, everything. They knew there might be no victory, but they wanted proof that humanity had once existed. Each night, while the generators hummed, those scientists would pause for a few seconds and listen to the static from space. The unknown rhythm was still there, growing stronger, as if the sender was coming closer. Some of them couldn't sleep anymore. They dreamed of dark shapes moving between the stars, of enormous shadows swallowing sunlight. Then one day, every observatory in the world caught it at once. The countdown. It wasn't words this time, but a long sequence of pulses that decreased in length every few hours. No one could agree on what it meant, but everyone felt it in their bones. Time was running out. The news finally leaked to the public, not through official statements, but through a quiet panic spreading online. People uploaded the mysterious sounds, and millions listened. Some said it was a warning from an alien empire. Others thought it was a prank or a new kind of weapon. But deep down, even those who laughed felt an uneasy chill. Cities began to prepare without saying why. Strange drills took place in schools. Government planes crossed the skies more often. Factories worked without rest, producing machines no one had seen before. People started to store food, water, and batteries. The world was changing, yet no one could explain what they were afraid of. In one of the old cities, a group of students stayed awake on the roof of their hostel every night, staring at the stars. They weren't scientists or soldiers. They were just curious souls trying to make sense of the strange lights moving across the sky. They wondered if life existed out there, something with thoughts, memories, and a sense of purpose like theirs. Then they wondered if that same life could see them too. One night, the sky pulsed again. This time, the signal was so powerful that car radios, televisions, even mobile phones caught it. A deep vibration rolled across the planet, shaking buildings ever so slightly, like thunder trapped beneath the ground. Then silence. For the first time, every device, every connection went quiet. The digital world held its breath. That silence lasted only a few seconds, but people never forgot it. It was as if the planet had paused, listening to something enormous and ancient moving beyond sight. After that, communication systems began to fail one by one. Power grids flickered. Navigation satellites vanished from radar. It was like someone was reaching through the stars and plucking Earth's tools away piece by piece. Yet despite the growing fear, humanity didn't stop. Scientists continued their work underground. Politicians continued their secret calls, and ordinary people continued to live their small, hopeful lives. Couples got married, babies were born, songs were written, prayers were whispered. The beauty of life somehow felt stronger against the fear of ending. A few brave researchers decided to face the unknown directly. They built a transmitter so powerful that it could send a signal beyond the solar system, something bright enough to be noticed by any civilization. They called it a message of resistance. It was short but fierce. "We are not your prey." The signal left Earth like a golden arrow cutting through the dark. For days afterward, people watched the sky, waiting for a sign that someone had heard it. None came. Instead, a strange light appeared near the moon, faint but constant, like an eye watching from afar. The signal from the stars returned one final time, clearer than ever, carrying a voice that every translation system on Earth struggled to decode. It said only 2 words. Then everything went quiet again. No one knew what those words meant. Some said they were a command. Others believed they were a promise. Yet everyone who heard them felt the same weight in their chest, the sense that something vast had turned its gaze directly toward Earth. Governments stopped pretending. They closed borders, shut down broadcasts, and began moving entire populations toward underground shelters. Those who couldn't move were told to stay calm, though calm had already left the world. Still, not everyone gave in to fear. There were scientists, soldiers, and dreamers who refused to accept that humanity's story would end in silence. They continued working on the last command, their hands trembling but determined. Deep underground, machines hummed as humanity prepared its voice, the voice that might outlive the planet itself. The young technician who first discovered the signal sat alone one night, staring at the same screen where it had all begun. Outside, the snow fell softly. Inside, the machines blinked, patient and loyal. He listened to the distant hum of the universe, wondering if the stars could feel sadness. He whispered softly to himself, "If they're coming, let them know we lived." The countdown signal returned one final time that night, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of something beyond comprehension. And somewhere between fear and wonder, the people of Earth realized they were no longer just watching the stars. The stars were watching them back. After the first signals came, the world changed in ways no one had ever imagined. Governments had no choice but to work together, even the ones that were enemies for generations. It was not about power anymore. It was about survival. The sky above was no longer just a sky. Every flicker of light, every strange cloud, every sudden blackout made people look up and wonder if they were already here. Inside hidden bases buried under mountains, oceans, and frozen lands, work began in silence. Scientists, engineers, and thinkers from every part of the world were gathered. Some were young and full of ideas, others old and tired but wise. They all shared one fear and one hope: to keep humanity alive, or at least make sure its story was never lost. They called their secret project the Last Command. The project was unlike anything the world had tried before. It wasn't just about building weapons or spaceships. It was about creating something that could speak for every living soul on Earth, even if the planet itself was destroyed. The idea was to make a signal so strong it could cross galaxies, a pulse that carried the memory of humankind. In one of the secret bases, deep below the ground, hundreds of people worked without sunlight. The air was heavy with the smell of metal and electricity. Screens glowed in the dark, showing lines of strange data that only a few could understand. Some worked on coding the message, others worked on the massive energy generators that would launch it. Everyone knew time was running out. Outside, people could feel something strange in the air. Cities were filled with quiet tension. Television channels began showing old movies and songs more often, as if everyone wanted to remember what it meant to laugh, to dance, to love. In parks and small towns, people gathered in silence to watch the stars. They knew something was coming, though they didn't know what. Farmers continued planting crops even when the weather turned strange. Children went to school but learned more about space than history now. In every corner of the world, hope and fear lived side by side. Meanwhile, the signals from space kept getting closer. At first, they came once a week. Then every day. Then every few hours. The scientists noticed a pattern. A slow approach, like a giant hand reaching across the galaxy. Meetings between leaders became tense. They argued about whether to prepare for battle or to send a message of peace. Some believed that maybe the beings from space were not enemies, just explorers. Others said that the pattern in the signals looked like scanning, like something measuring Earth as if it were prey. No one could agree. So every nation began its own silent race. Weapons were designed in secret labs. Underground bunkers were filled with supplies. Space agencies worked non-stop to send more satellites, though many of them vanished before reaching orbit. There was a strange calmness in the chaos. People started to value simple things, sharing food, hugging loved ones, watching sunsets. Even though fear was everywhere, life did not stop. It only became more precious. Inside one of the secret labs, an old scientist worked late every night, his hands trembling from age and exhaustion. He had seen wars and disasters, but nothing like this. When he looked at the data on his screen, he whispered to himself, "They're testing us." The others didn't know what he meant, but he kept saying it. They want to see if we're united or divided. Across the planet, scientists began sending small test signals into space, hoping to find something, anything that would respond differently. None did. The only reply that came was the same deep pulse from the Empire's direction, stronger each time. One night, a signal hit so hard that power grids across Europe failed instantly. The lights went out from city to city, leaving millions in darkness. The stars above were bright, cold, and silent. Then the sky turned red for a few seconds, just a shimmer like a reflection from something vast. That was the night everyone realized that this was not just a warning. It was a show of power. The Empire was already close enough to reach Earth without even landing. The next morning, governments stopped pretending it was nothing. Broadcasts across the globe went out with one message. Humanity is facing an external threat. Stay calm. Stay united. For a few hours, the world was silent again. Then chaos followed. People ran to stores, filled highways, and tried to escape cities. But there was nowhere to run. The fear wasn't about war or bombs. It was the fear of something so large that no weapon could fight it. In the hidden base, the last command team received urgent orders to speed up. They were humanity's last line, the only group working on something that might matter after everything was gone. They didn't sleep for days. Every person there carried a small photo or token from home. Some had written letters to their families in case they never saw them again. To stay focused, they avoided thinking about the sky. They talked about the message, the one that would carry every language, every melody, every heartbeat of the planet. It would be more than just data. It would be a memory capsule of everything that made humanity human. They recorded voices of children laughing, the sound of rain on leaves, ocean waves, even the heartbeat of a newborn baby. They believed that someday, somewhere, someone might hear those sounds and know that a small blue planet once lived and loved beneath the stars. Far away, soldiers guarded launch sites built in deserts and mountains. These weren't missile sites anymore. They were energy towers ready to beam the signal once the core generator was finished. The world was using every last bit of power it had to send this one message. Time moved fast. The signals from the Empire changed again, now forming shapes in the sky that could be seen even with the naked eye. Strange patterns of light spread across the night like silent warnings written in the heavens. Every nation watched in awe and terror. Some leaders still hoped to communicate. Others believed it was too late. The planet had one last chance to send the last command before the Empire arrived. On the final day of testing, the main generator failed. Smoke filled the underground tunnels. People screamed, machines sparked, and hope nearly died. For hours, they worked in the dark trying to fix it. The generator's coils were overheating and the cooling system had stopped. It felt like the end before the real end had even begun. Then one of the young engineers had an idea, a risky one. They rerouted power directly from nearby cities to the base, draining electricity from half the continent. For 10 seconds, every light on the surface went dark again. Entire nations went black. unaware that their energy was being used to power humanity's final message. Deep below, the machines came alive again. The core glowed white-hot, data poured in like rivers of light. The transmission began to take shape. A sound, a signal, a heartbeat wrapped in code. The room was filled with people staring at the monitors, tired but hopeful. They could feel it now. This wasn't just a project. It was a promise that even if the Empire destroyed everything, something of humanity would survive. When the system stabilized, the lead scientist stood in silence for a long time. He looked around at the faces of his team, people from every country, every language, all working together. Then he said softly, "If we fail, let this be our voice in the dark." Outside, the night was quiet again. The air was heavy with stillness before the storm. Around the world, people watched the stars like they were looking into the eyes of an enemy they couldn't see. The old songs on the radio felt more emotional than ever. Street musicians played for free. Families sat together holding hands, whispering old stories as if passing them on one last time. Children still laughed, not understanding the full truth. Old people prayed quietly. Lovers promised they would find each other again, no matter what happened. It was as if the entire world was breathing in the same rhythm. Fear, hope, and love mixed together in every heart. Then, in the deepest hours of night, a strange light appeared in the northern sky. It wasn't like the aurora. It was something else, colder, slower, deliberate. It moved like a thought spreading across the horizon. The Empire had arrived. But inside that underground base, surrounded by walls of steel and miles of earth, the last command was almost ready. Humanity had only one weapon left, not of fire or war, but of memory. A voice that would carry through the endless night. The team worked until their hands bled, their eyes red with exhaustion. They didn't stop. They couldn't stop. Because beyond the fear, they all believed in one simple truth. If humanity must disappear, it should vanish with dignity, with its story echoing across the universe. The air over the planet had changed. It wasn't something people could see, but everyone could feel it. The quiet hum of life that had always surrounded Earth now carried a strange pulse, a low vibration that settled deep inside the bones. Radios caught small waves of it. Dogs barked without reason. Power grids flickered, and machines failed for no clear cause. The sky had started to react to something no human eye could see, but everyone knew it was close. In the underground base, the scientists and engineers who had been working for months without rest were barely sleeping now. They had almost finished the last command. The message was built, tested, and waiting to be sent. It carried the sounds of rain, laughter, children's voices, songs from every culture, words in every language, a perfect echo of what Earth was. But before they could send it, they needed to find the right moment, when the signal could break free from the chaos in the atmosphere. Above the ground, cities were no longer normal. Streets were empty in many places, while others were overcrowded with people trying to find safety. Governments had told the world that something powerful was approaching, though they didn't describe what. Everyone called it the light. Some said it looked beautiful. Some said it made them feel sick. For others, it was proof that the stories were true. The Empire had arrived. For the first time in history, every country watched the same patch of sky. A strange light had appeared beyond the moon, faint at first like a distant sunrise that never ended. Over days it grew brighter, stretching across the darkness in long silver arcs. The light wasn't moving fast. It seemed patient, almost thoughtful, as if observing Earth from afar. At first, people hoped it was a miracle, maybe a sign of peace. But that hope didn't last long. When the light reached full brightness, everything electrical on the planet failed at once. Airplanes froze mid-air, cities went black, even watches stopped ticking. For a full minute, the world was completely still. Then, just as suddenly, power returned. Lights came back on, but thousands of devices were burned beyond repair. The message was clear. It could touch Earth whenever it wanted. Inside the underground base, the team knew this was their warning. They worked faster than ever, the sound of clattering tools mixing with the deep rumble of generators. The leader of the team, a quiet man who had lost his family in the early panic, gathered everyone and said, "We can't stop what's coming, but we can show them who we are." His words weren't loud, but they stayed in everyone's mind. Above them, the world's defenses began to activate. Satellites armed with lasers, rockets, and experimental shields launched into orbit. It was a desperate plan, built in fear and hope. Every country had contributed something. Some offered technology, others manpower, others just courage. For once, humanity stood as one. No borders, no divisions, just survival. The first direct contact happened on a quiet morning. Astronomers tracking the light saw something moving in its core. A shape, massive and symmetrical, almost like a city floating in space. It didn't send words. It sent frequencies, patterns of sound that translated into a simple message: submit or be reformed. When the translation reached Earth's leaders, silence filled the rooms. The words were calm, cold, and final. The message repeated every few hours, and with each repeat, more satellites vanished from orbit. No one knew if they were destroyed or simply taken away. There was a moment when some governments considered surrendering, thinking maybe mercy existed somewhere in that vast empire. Others refused to even consider it. Humanity had always been stubborn, and now that stubbornness was the only thing keeping it alive. The decision was made in secret meetings that lasted through sleepless nights. Earth would respond, not with surrender, but with defiance. The world's defense systems would fire together, targeting the bright structure beyond the moon. It would be a message of strength. Even if it failed, it would show that humanity still had a voice. When the day came, the planet looked strangely peaceful. Blue oceans shimmered under the sun, and the continents glowed with city lights. No one on the surface could see the weapons hidden deep within the atmosphere, but they were there, waiting for the signal. At exactly 03 ORAR Universal Time, the command was given. From every continent, from ships, bases, and orbiting platforms, beams of energy shot into the sky. The night turned to day as streaks of light rose upward, meeting the stars in silence. The Earth's pulse had become a roar. For several minutes, the sky looked like it was on fire. People around the world stopped to watch, cheering, crying, some praying, some laughing from pure relief. For the first time in a long while, humanity wasn't afraid. They had struck back. But the celebration didn't last long. The beams disappeared into the sky and didn't seem to touch anything. The light beyond the moon dimmed for a moment, then flared brighter, as if replying. A new signal appeared, not in sound this time, but in light. It spread across the planet's atmosphere like a curtain of silver mist. It wasn't an explosion. It was silence made visible. Every electronic signal on Earth stopped again, permanently this time. Cars died on roads, planes landed wherever they could, and communication was gone. The world had fallen into quiet darkness. Inside the underground base, emergency power flickered. The engineers panicked, trying to protect their systems. The last command's transmitter was almost ready, but the final code sequence hadn't been loaded. Without it, the message would fail. The old scientist who had once said, "They're testing us," whispered something again. He said, "Now they're listening." His trembling hands worked faster than they ever had, typing line after line of code, while the world above crumbled. Hours later, the first shockwave hit the surface. It wasn't a blast, but a deep vibration that passed through the ground and air. Windows shattered, oceans shook, and mountains rumbled. The Empire had begun its cleansing, its so-called reformation. Yet somewhere deep underground, humanity's last group of survivors kept typing, building, fixing. They didn't look up, didn't speak, didn't cry. They just worked. Then something unexpected happened. Across the globe, small groups of people began to act together. Not soldiers, not scientists, just ordinary people. They carried water to hospitals, fixed broken machines, built fires to guide lost travelers in the dark. There was no command, no leader, just the simple will to help each other. Even as the skies burned faintly with strange light, Earth's people chose kindness over fear. That human spirit, unwritten, unseen, was what kept the last command alive. The team below the ground finished their code and began the countdown. The final step was ready. They would send the message no matter what happened next. Before activating the system, they listened one last time to the outer signals. The Empire's voice came through clearly like thunder under the sea. Submit or be reformed. Those were the only words repeated. The leader of the team closed his eyes and said quietly, "We choose neither. We choose to remember." Then with trembling fingers he pressed the final switch. The generator screamed to life. The air crackled with energy. The sound of power filled every corner of the base. A blinding pulse of light built in the core chamber. growing brighter and brighter until it felt like standing inside a small sun. The signal was being born. On the surface, people looked up as the ground vibrated again, but this time the light came from below, not above. The Earth itself seemed to glow as if the planet's heart had decided to fight back. The last command burst through the crust and shot into the sky, a wave of invisible energy carrying voices, dreams, laughter, tears, and hope. It raced past the Empire's glowing structure and vanished into the dark. For a moment, the light in the sky dimmed. The Empire had felt it. They didn't respond right away, as if they were listening. Then the sky flared one last time. A silver flash covered the moon, and a faint vibration passed through the planet. Cities crumbled, oceans rose, and then silence came once again. But the message was gone, out there beyond their reach. Humanity had done it. Even if Earth fell, their voice had escaped. In the final moments before everything went quiet, the scientists looked at each other and smiled weakly. Not because they were safe, but because they had done the one thing the Empire couldn't understand. They had chosen meaning over power. Somewhere far above, in the endless dark, that message kept moving, carrying every heartbeat that ever existed on Earth. It was not a cry for help. It was a reminder that once, a small blue planet refused to vanish quietly. The world that once shone with lights, laughter, and sound had fallen into silence. The oceans no longer roared the same way, and the winds moved like they were carrying whispers of a lost age. The sky was heavy with clouds that glowed faintly at night, touched by the strange energy that had come from beyond the stars. Earth was still spinning, but it didn't feel alive anymore. The Empire's touch had spread across continents, quiet, cold, and merciless. In the deep underground base, hidden beneath miles of frozen ice, a small group of people still breathed. They were the ones who had launched the last command, the final message carrying every trace of human life into the stars. The world above was almost gone, but below the surface, the hum of machines and the faint rhythm of human hearts kept the silence from swallowing everything. Days had lost their meaning. There were no clocks, no sunlight, only the soft, endless glow of computer screens. The survivors had lost contact with every other station. They didn't know if anyone else was alive. Still, they kept working, fixing systems, checking for signals, searching for something, anything that might answer. One of them often sat near the old radio system, tuning the frequencies again and again, even though he knew the chance of hearing a voice was almost zero. Every few minutes he would whisper, "Someone's out there. They have to be." The others never stopped him. That small hope was all they had left. Above ground, the cities were no longer cities. Buildings stood like bones of a dead giant. The Empire hadn't destroyed everything with fire. It had simply erased life itself, leaving behind the empty shells of human creation. Cars sat motionless. Plants had turned gray, and the rivers glowed faintly at night with traces of alien dust. It was as if the planet had been drained of its soul. Yet even in this quiet ruin, small signs of life flickered. In distant mountain regions, deep forests, and under collapsed shelters, a few survivors still moved. They were scared, hungry, but alive. They didn't understand the full story of what had happened. They only knew that the sky had changed forever, and that the old world was gone. Some of them carried radios that no longer worked. Others kept photographs or small objects from the past, a book, a toy, a bracelet. Those things reminded them that the world had once been warm and full of laughter. Back in the underground base, the leader of the team stood before a large screen that displayed the last command's final data stream. It had been sent successfully, but they couldn't track where it had gone. They could only guess it was still traveling somewhere through the darkness, carrying the essence of humanity into places unknown. Even though the transmission was complete, no one felt relief. They had saved humanity's memory, but not its future. The base was growing weaker every day. The energy sources were fading and food was running out. The air smelled of metal and fatigue. Still, they tried to hold on to routine. Some wrote journals, others cleaned the machinery, or tried to grow small plants in artificial soil. One person had started drawing on the walls, sketches of trees, oceans, and faces of people they missed. Those rough drawings became a reminder of everything they were fighting to remember. Outside, strange storms began to form. The sky flashed with colors that had never existed before. Pale gold, violet, and deep silver. It wasn't lightning and it wasn't natural. It was the energy of the Empire's machines reshaping Earth slowly, layer by layer. Mountains began to sink, Seas began to rise, and the air itself shimmered as if reality was melting. One evening, the survivors in the base felt the tremors. The ground shook softly at first, then harder. Dust fell from the ceiling and alarms began to flash red. They rushed to stabilize the generators, but half of the systems had already failed. The screens flickered, and the leader realized that the Empire's final wave was reaching even this hidden place. He gathered everyone and said quietly, "If this base falls, it won't matter." Our voice is already out there. There was no panic in his tone, only calm. A kind of peace that comes when there's nothing left to lose. They all knew he was right. They had done what they were meant to do. The last command had left Earth and nothing could erase it now. As the power faded, the team decided to make one last attempt to send a short signal into space. A small follow-up message, even weaker than the first. It wasn't to ask for help. It was simply to tell the universe one thing. We lived. They rewired parts of the broken transmitter, connecting it to emergency power. Every light in the base flickered. The room was filled with the deep hum of energy, the same sound that had once filled the planet when it was alive. They recorded the message in their own voices, men and women speaking softly into a microphone. "We are still here," one said. "We remember the world as it was," said another. "We hope you hear us," said the last. When the final words were recorded, they launched the signal into the void. It wasn't strong. It might not travel far, but it was real, and that was enough. Moments later, the lights went out completely. The silence returned, heavier than ever. Only the faint echo of the generator's last breath remained. The team sat together in the dark, listening, waiting, hoping for something to answer. Hours passed. Then a faint sound came through the radio. It wasn't clear, and it wasn't human. A low, steady rhythm echoed through the static, almost like a heartbeat. Everyone froze. It could have been interference, but they didn't care. In that moment, it felt like the universe had whispered back. Tears filled their eyes. Even if it was just a reflection of their own signal, they took it as a reply, a sign that somewhere their message had been heard. Above them, the Empire's transformation continued. Entire continents began to sink under glowing clouds. Oceans boiled in silence. The planet's core trembled. Earth was dying, but not defeated. Its final act had already escaped into the stars, free from the Empire's reach. In the last hours, as the base began to crack under pressure, the survivors gathered together. They talked about the world before all this, the smell of rain, the sound of laughter in busy streets, the feeling of sunlight on skin. Their words painted pictures in the air, keeping the memory alive for just a little longer. The leader listened quietly, then smiled faintly and said, "Maybe one day someone will find that message. Maybe they'll know what we were." He looked toward the ceiling as if he could see the stars through the ice and rock above. His voice softened. "If they do, they'll know we weren't just afraid. We loved, we built, we dreamed." Outside, the ground trembled again, stronger this time. A deep crack ran across the base, lights bursting one by one. The walls began to collapse. The air filled with dust and heat. Yet no one screamed. They sat close to each other, holding hands, their faces calm. The last thing anyone saw before the darkness swallowed them was the flicker of the communication screen, still glowing faintly, showing the repeating signal they had sent. The words "we lived" blinked once, then disappeared. Far beyond the planet, the last command continued its endless journey. It carried the heartbeat of Earth, passing dead stars and frozen moons, moving through silence and distance. Somewhere out there, it was still traveling, still whispering the story of a small planet that refused to vanish quietly. Back on Earth, the light of the Empire faded slowly. The planet was quiet again, covered in silver mist and strange light. Yet under all that, deep within its broken core, there was a faint, stubborn rhythm, like the last echo of a song that refused to end. And so, even in its fall, Earth wasn't truly gone. Its voice had already escaped into eternity. It had told the stars who humanity was, a species that fought not for power but for remembrance, a world that turned its final breath into a message of love. The last command kept traveling through the empty space, moving far beyond the reach of human eyes. It carried the voices of those who had sent it, their hopes, memories, and final words. For millions of miles it drifted through the darkness like a fragile light. Most signals fade in time, but this one didn't. Something within it refused to disappear. The message crossed through fields of cosmic dust, slipped around dead planets and passed through the silence between galaxies. Stars came and went in its path, burning bright and then vanishing. But the signal kept going, steady and patient. It was like a heartbeat moving through the endless night. In one distant corner of the universe, where light took thousands of years to travel, a listening post stood quietly on a small frozen moon. It wasn't human-built. It belonged to a civilization that had long mastered the secrets of time and gravity. They didn't need war or conquest. They only observed. They had been watching the stars for centuries, studying the rise and fall of worlds. When the signal from Earth reached them, it was weak, barely a whisper among billions of cosmic noises. Yet it caught their attention. The machine detected a strange pattern inside it. Not numbers or coordinates, but emotion. Curiosity stirred among them. They strengthened the reception, decoding the message bit by bit until words began to appear on their glowing screens. We lived. We remembered. We hoped you'd hear us. The watchers didn't understand everything, but they felt something inside those simple words. They had never heard such a message before. Most civilizations they studied ended quietly, their signals fading into static. None had ever sent a farewell so full of feeling. The leader of the observers, a being of light and calm thought, turned to the others and said, "This message came from a world that no longer breathes. Yet it carries warmth." They began to trace where the signal came from. It had traveled across great distances, through storms of radiation and dark matter. The source was a small blue planet on the edge of a spiral galaxy, a planet that had once glowed with life. They studied it carefully, observing its orbit, its burnt atmosphere, its silent continents. The surface was covered in silver clouds and strange energy patterns, remains of what the Galactic Empire had done. The observers recorded everything. They replayed the message again and again. Some of them felt sadness. Others felt respect. One said softly, "This world may be gone, but its voice still moves through space. That means something." Meanwhile, in the far reaches of what remained of the Galactic Empire, silence ruled the halls of their enormous stations. The conquest of Earth had been complete but hollow. The Empire had won, yet something about this victory brought unease. Reports came from their scientists. Strange readings in deep space. A faint signal, unlike any they had ever seen, was moving away from the Milky Way. The Empire's commanders were curious. They tracked it, analyzed it, and realized it came from Earth. To them, it was just data, nothing dangerous. Still, some among them wondered why the humans had sent such a thing. One of the Empire's officers said in a low tone, "They knew they couldn't win. Why waste their last energy sending this?" Another replied coldly, "Because they were trying to be remembered." That sentence stayed in the air longer than it should have. Remembered. The Empire had erased thousands of species across time, yet none had ever sent a message like this. It unsettled them. For the first time, they began to think not about control, but about meaning. Back in the hidden places of Earth, something unexpected began to happen. Deep below the planet's crust, where the base had been destroyed, a small core of energy flickered. It came from the very machine that had launched the last command. Somehow it still pulsed with faint life. The power cells had reactivated on their own, drawing strength from the strange energy the Empire had left behind. The machine began to hum again, quietly, like it was breathing. It replayed the voices of those who had recorded the final message. The sound was soft but steady, echoing through the dark tunnels. "We are still here. We remember the world as it was." Outside, the planet's surface was slowly changing. The Empire's energy storms were beginning to fade. The silver mist that had covered everything began to dissolve. In some parts of the world, the clouds cleared just enough for faint sunlight to touch the ground again. The light was weak, but it was real. In the ruins of what was once a great city, a small movement stirred. Under the broken stones and twisted metal, a single hand pushed upward. A survivor. Covered in dust and shaking, the person crawled out from beneath the rubble. Their breath was rough, but their eyes were open. The survivor looked around, confused. The city was gone, but the air felt slightly warmer than before. The sky above was strange, glowing faintly with colors they had never seen. They didn't know how long they had been asleep or buried, but they were alive. Slowly, they began to walk. There was no food, no water, yet something inside pushed them forward. Their footsteps echoed in the emptiness, each step a reminder that life still existed. Over the next few days, other survivors began to appear from different ruins. Some had been hidden deep underground, others trapped in sealed shelters that somehow held together. When they found each other, there were tears, disbelief, and quiet joy. No one knew what had happened to the Empire. Maybe it had left. Maybe it had moved on. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they were still here. Together, the survivors began to gather near an old communication tower that still stood half-broken but upright. They wanted to rebuild it, not for war or messages of power, but to send a single signal, to say that humanity had not ended. The tower was damaged beyond repair, but they worked day and night to fix it. They used whatever scraps they could find, wires, metal, batteries, old machines. Some didn't even understand how it worked, but they learned, shared, and built. After weeks of effort, the tower came to life. Its antenna trembled, lights blinking weakly. They didn't know if it would reach anyone, but they didn't care. They recorded a short message, spoken by all of them together. "We are the children of Earth. We survived. We will rise again." When they pressed the button to send it, the tower glowed with a faint blue light. The sound traveled through the air, over the ruined land, across the seas, and into the sky. It was weak compared to the last command, but it was a beginning. Somewhere in the distant universe, the Watchers who had received the original message detected this new one. They listened quietly, realizing that life had returned to the world. They had thought lost. "The planet heals," one of them said softly. They decided to send something back, a gentle pulse of energy that could strengthen Earth's recovery. They couldn't interfere directly, but they could give a small gift. The pulse moved across light years unseen until it reached Earth's atmosphere. When it touched the planet, strange things began to happen. The soil that had been dead started to soften. Tiny green shoots pushed through cracks in the ground. The air grew cleaner. The survivors watched in awe as patches of grass appeared where there had only been ash. For the first time in years, they felt wind that carried the scent of life. They looked at each other, smiling through tears. The Earth was waking up. At night, when they looked at the stars, they thought about those who had sent the first message, the ones who didn't live to see this day. They whispered their gratitude into the dark, knowing their voices might one day reach wherever the last command had gone. The survivors began to rebuild, not the old world, but something simpler and wiser. They used what they had learned from Lost to start fresh. There were no countries, no borders, no fights over power, only people working together, sharing stories of the world that was and the hope for what could be. Children were born again under the soft light of new dawns. They grew up hearing tales of the last command and the ones who had sent it. Those stories became legends of how, when all hope was lost, humanity's final voice traveled through the stars and was heard. The message that once trembled through space had now come full circle, carrying life, memory, and peace back to the planet it came from. And so, the last command didn't just save the story of humanity, it saved the soul of Earth itself. Years passed quietly after the rebirth of Earth. The survivors had built small villages around the old ruins, not made of steel and glass, but of stone, wood, and hope. Nature had started reclaiming what once belonged to her. Trees rose from cracks in broken roads. Birds returned to sing on the edges of fallen towers, and rivers began to flow again with clear, shining water. The world once scarred by war and silence had finally begun to heal. Those who lived now didn't call themselves heroes. They saw themselves as caretakers, keepers of a second chance that the universe had somehow given back. Every morning when the sun touched the horizon, people stood quietly, feeling its warmth as if it were something sacred. For so long, they had lived under darkness and fear, but now, light felt like a miracle. In one of the growing settlements, a group of young people often gathered near the old communication tower, the same one that had once sent out the message declaring humanity's survival. The tower was no longer used to call for help. It had become a symbol of unity. Children played around it, asking questions about the past. The elders told them stories about how the world had fallen and how, in its final moments, a message had been sent to the stars. They spoke of those who had stayed underground, those who had refused to surrender, and how their voices had carried across galaxies. The story became more than history. It became a heartbeat that shaped the new generation. Everyone learned that life wasn't just about surviving. It was about remembering and rebuilding. The people didn't have advanced technology anymore. Most machines were buried or broken beyond repair. But what they had now was something far more valuable: peace. They learned to work with the land, grow food, and share resources. The greed and divisions that once ruled humanity had disappeared. They understood that the planet didn't belong to them. It was something they were lucky to be part of. Sometimes at night, people gathered around the fire and looked up at the stars. The sky was clearer now, no longer filled with strange silver clouds. When they saw the bright trails of light moving far above, they wondered if their ancestors' message was still out there, drifting across the endless dark. Some believed it was still traveling. Others believed someone had heard it and sent their blessing back, the mysterious pulse that had helped Earth heal. In one of those peaceful nights, an old man, one of the few who had survived from the time before, sat near the fire surrounded by children. His hair was white and his face was marked with years of both pain and wisdom. The children loved his stories. They called him the Keeper of the Command, because he had once worked on the last signal project deep underground. When a child asked him if the stars could hear humans, he smiled faintly and said, "Maybe the stars don't hear us with ears. Maybe they listen with their light. When we sent our final message, we didn't just send words. We sent what made us human. Love, memory, and courage. That never truly fades." The children looked up in awe, imagining a message glowing somewhere far away, watched over by beings who cared. The thought gave them comfort, and they went to sleep with dreams of galaxies filled with friends they had never met. As years turned into decades, Earth changed further. The forests grew thicker, the seas calmer. Strange new plants began to appear, perhaps touched by the same cosmic energy that had once scarred the world. Some glowed faintly at night, spreading gentle light over fields and valleys. People began to see them as gifts from the stars, symbols that Earth and the universe were connected in ways they couldn't fully understand. Villages turned into small towns. Humanity began rebuilding quietly, not rushing, not repeating old mistakes. They built wind towers, small energy collectors, and learned to use what little technology remained with care. They even rediscovered parts of old satellites and space communication systems, left drifting above the planet. A small group of scientists, inspired by the old stories, started working to rebuild one of those systems. Their dream wasn't to conquer the stars, but to send a message of gratitude. They wanted to tell whoever had helped Earth recover that the gift had worked, that humanity had survived and learned. It took many years of hard work. They studied ancient files, repaired broken circuits, and created new devices using both old human knowledge and new wisdom gained from observation of nature. Every person in their community helped, even if it was just bringing food or materials. The dream belonged to everyone. Finally, one evening, under a sky full of shimmering stars, the system was ready. The people gathered once again at the old communication tower. It had been repaired, rebuilt, and crowned with a new antenna that sparkled faintly with blue light. The entire settlement stood around it, silent but full of anticipation. The leader of the group stepped forward. Their voice was soft but carried strength. "Long ago," they said, "our ancestors sent a message into space when they thought all hope was lost. That message carried who we were, our spirit. Today we send another one, not of fear but of thanks." They activated the transmitter. The sound of energy filled the air, humming gently like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Then the message began to play. It was simple, just a few words spoken by people of all ages. "To the stars that hurt us before, we thank you. Our world lives again. We remember the gift you gave. We will protect this home. And if anyone out there ever needs help, we will be the ones to answer." The tower glowed brighter. The signal left Earth, rising through the sky, past the clouds, through the upper atmosphere, and into the quiet of space. The people watched it fade into the distance, tears glimmering in their eyes. It wasn't sadness, it was pride. Somewhere far away, on that same frozen moon where the Watchers had once received the last command, the signal reached again. The ancient machines, still functioning, detected the familiar rhythm. The Watchers had changed over time, too. They had listened to thousands of worlds, but this one, they remembered. When they decoded the message and heard the humans' words, something stirred among them again. They looked toward the direction of the blue planet and felt a quiet joy. One of them said, "They kept their promise. They remembered us." The Watchers decided to send a response, a soft beam of golden light carrying no words, only warmth. It traveled through the dark like a sunrise, reaching Earth after many days. When it entered the atmosphere, people saw it as a falling star, glowing brighter and brighter until it spread across the sky. No one was afraid. They felt peace. Children pointed upward, laughing, while the elders smiled, recognizing the sign. The light covered the world for a few moments, then gently faded into the night, but it left behind a feeling that words couldn't describe. A feeling of connection, like the universe itself had placed a hand over Earth and whispered, "You are not alone." After that day, humanity changed again. They didn't see themselves as the center of existence anymore. They saw themselves as part of something far larger, a universe full of life, waiting to be discovered not through conquest but through kindness. Generations passed, and the story of the last command became a legend told in every home, every school, every gathering. It wasn't just a story about loss, it was about endurance, unity, and love that reached beyond death and distance. People no longer feared the night sky. They looked up at it with gratitude, knowing that among the endless stars, there was understanding and friendship. In time, humanity would again travel into space, not as conquerors, but as explorers, guided by the lessons of their past. They would carry with them the same message written long ago. We lived. We remembered. We hoped you'd hear us. The stars had indeed heard. And somewhere in the quiet depths of the universe, where light and time met, the last command continued to echo softly, eternally, telling the story of a small blue planet that once fell, rose again, and learned to live with the stars. Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a voice, a promise, and a reminder that even in the darkest silence, humanity's spirit could still shine through.